In today's episode, we're going to be talking about whether or not the term narcissistic abuse is being overused. And in the self-help segment will be some strategies to use when you face common arguments like Darwin. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, where we talk about strategies, tips, and tricks on navigating and recovering from narcissistic abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie McAvoy, a mental health clinician with over 20 years experience and author of Love You More, a graphic inside look at my experience of a toxic relationship.
And I'm your other co-host, Tara Blair Ball, a certified relationship coach, an abuse survivor, and author of Reclaim and Recover, Heal from Toxic Relationships with a 7-step guided journal.
We're thrilled that you're here with us today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and leave us a review and let us know what you think of the show. You can find me at Instagram at Carrie McAvoy, PhD.
And I'm at Tara.relationshipcoach.
So I don't know about you, Tara, but I've been hearing a lot about whether we're demonizing people for calling them narcissists and saying they're abusive, and why are we calling it narcissistic abuse? Isn't it just abuse? Is that something you're hearing much about? Is that
I
happening?
hear it all the time. I hear it, especially when I work with couples. They'll ask me, is my partner a narcissistic? Is this narcissistic abuse what I'm experiencing? And they'll use other terms like discarding and love bombing. So yeah, I'm definitely hearing it a lot.
Yeah. And it kind of gets my dander up. That's my reaction. I get a little frustrated about it. But so let's kind of unpack it. Let's unpack about what is narcissistic abuse versus abuse, and then who does it, and does it have to be a narcissist who's being narcissistically abusive? So did you happen to see the really great article in Psych Central by Dr. Kristen Milstead?
No.
Yeah, she in it defines narcissistic abuse, and she wrote a book, Why Can't I Just Leave? Waking Up and Walking Out of a Pathological Love Relationship. Amazing book. I highly recommend it. And I got to interview her last August. She wrote a piece a couple years ago proposing how to define what narcissistic abuse is. And I think that it's spot on and really sets it separate from abuse as a whole. So abuse as a whole, according to the National Domestic Violence Association, is anytime someone has a pattern of behavior of control and domination over another person. That's how they kind of define that. So let's stop on that for a second. How would you define that in your life, or have you seen it with clients? What would be a good example of that?
So I worked with a couple not too long ago where they had come to me with communication problems. In reality, the one of the partners would constantly belittle, deflect, yell, scream at his partner. So in that case, in that relationship, it's not a communication issue. If I actually asked him, what is she telling you that's bothering you in the relationship? He knew. He could recite back to me, but it was this very much an intent to control, dominate, focus the change of the narrative in the relationship. That's what it was built on. It's that he didn't want to hear what she had to say. He didn't want to deal with her uncomfortable feelings. And so it was an act of dominating. And that's why he would scream, why he would yell, why he would storm off, things like that. It was very much about how can I be in control of what I'm hearing, what I'm around, etc.
Right. Yeah. And I often think of the old adage of a guy or a woman having a rough time at work, and they're having all sorts of, like, maybe even fear of losing the job, or things aren't going well, or maybe there's money problems, and they come home and then they scream or are assaultive to their family or to their children or their partner because of the issues at work. They're kind of offloading their inability to handle something. Yeah, I agree. So, and I think that's a really great way to think about it. So it's a pattern of behavior to dominate and control another person, which really kind of encapsulate the whole lots of directions, like financial and spiritual and emotional,
Right.
all sorts of stuff. So what Kristen Milstead presented in the Psych Central was that how narcissistic abuse differs is that it is a deceptive persona developed in order to gain access to the other person's resource, but presented in a way that that person is not aware that this relationship is actually set up on false pretenses. and that the persona is created so that everyone assumes it, along with the partner and the world, that this is a good person wanting to have a valuable or a authentic relationship with an individual, but it actually is not actually that at all. It's just a deception. And that is in order to exploit the other person and exploit the relationship.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's way beyond just abuse. That's so calculating and cruel and malicious. And it's so beyond just trying to control someone because it's also controlling how they see you, what you have access to, controlling how other people outside the relationship view, you, because that provides support of you can't leave this relationship. He or she is such a good person. You must be faking. I definitely dealt with that in my own marriage, that when I left that marriage, everybody was stunned. He's such a good guy. He's so great. My own parents sided with my ex-husband. Like they still speak to him. They still see him. Like he's like their son and they gave up their own daughter. And because he seemed like such a good guy. And it's funny when I caught my ex-husband was a drug addict. He'd hidden it for 8 years. And when I found drugs in my house and confronted him, because I finally had infallible proof, like, I'm not going to bring drugs in this house. Clearly, you're the only one who lives here. You brought drugs in this house. When I confronted him, he actually said, every time I get caught, no one thinks I would do it.
Wow. So he
Because
admitted, he admitted that
he admitted. And there were things, so he had been a thief before we started dating. He had worked for a church where he'd stolen thousands of dollars from the collection basket. I'm not even joking. But when he told me that, I just saw someone who had owned that, was held accountable and had reformed himself and had made amends. Like he had paid money back to the church for that he'd stolen and things like that. So that's what I was seeing is the person that I thought he was. He had reframed himself. He was a better person. He was a good guy. No, that was all things he told me because he knew that would help me see him as this good guy and never question of like, why are your eyes so red? Or where's this money going in our account? Like that's what it was leading to.
Yeah.
And
he just got better, Tara. He just got better because he got the previous experience said, these are the things to do. These are the things not to do. Yeah. That's why when people get kind of upset about narcissistic abuse saying, why aren't you just calling it abuse? Yes, it is abuse. It is abuse, but the dynamics is, I mean, if you think about those two definitions, a pattern of behavior to control and dominate another person, that doesn't say there's deception. I mean,
Mhm.
the clear cut situations of abuse I've seen or have experienced, everyone knew what was coming. We knew the person was getting edgy. We knew maybe the job wasn't going well or something was happening, with me, with my father, we grew up on a farm. The weather wasn't cooperating. We knew that he was, in a bad space and we could feel the tension building. There was no hiding who he was. And then whenever he would lose it, and then of course my dad was more silent, kind of withdrawing, sort of avoiding. He wasn't like in a explosive temper. It was just more of just things got super scary and got very hot and we kind of would all withdraw. But once it was over, then there would be the jovial, we all like, hey, we did it and we'll be better. And we've learned. I mean, it was just a cycle that we were on, but it wasn't hidden. But with this narcissistic abuse, though, just like you, I had no idea. I was thinking about this before today, this podcast, that the person I met and dated was amazing. He was an amazing guy. I really liked him a lot. My family really liked him a lot. I had no idea that he doesn't exist. He never existed. I mean, seriously, that persona was created in order to lure me into a relationship. In fact, I even remember where it dropped. The first sign it dropped was a delayed honeymoon, and the first day he drops it, and I get to see the real self. I had no clue this was coming. No clue. No hint. I mean, yeah, he could be a little irritable or critical, but I'm talking full blown, punitive it was scary. It shocked me. It shocked me. So that's why when I hear people say, "Oh, you're just, it's abuse. Why are you calling it narcissism?" No, it's different. It's profoundly different. Then the other question comes in, well, is it only narcissists who abuse? Because some people think we call it narcissistic abuse because it's narcissists who do the abuse. I frankly, Tara, wish we had never named it that. I think it's a mistake to name it this because my experience is it can be done by lots of different types of personalities, not just narcissists.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's this whole, so many of us have narcissistic tendencies anyway. You know what I mean? So it's not surprising that that behavior might come out, regardless. Like we all have our little narcissist. I know you talked about this with your videos too, is we all sort of have that in us. And some might be more prevalent to acting out on it than others. I know that I dated a man shortly after my separation from my first husband who similarly had an entire persona that he had sort of created. So basically when he was significantly older, we worked together. I was very much a wreck and I was literally preyed upon. That's the only way I can view it. I was preyed upon because I would have never dated someone like him if I had been in a better place. Um, but he created this persona of this nice rescuing white knight kind of guy, who's going to swoop in and treat me with love and kindness while my ex-husband never treated me that way, or at least didn't once we got married. Um, and I saw it too when it disappeared. Very critical. He was very fat phobic, like very awful about how he would talk about other women's bodies. It just awful. It was an awful person. But I never saw that until he let me see them,
Yeah.
period. And once I saw it, there was no going back. He could try to sort of bring out the personality, but I could always sort of see through it after that.
It's good that
And
you, because not all of us can. I mean, some of it, yes. I know that I kept believing in the first personality so profoundly that I kept thinking it's my fault. And if we could work on it, we would get ourselves back to this. But not realizing that person never existed. I didn't know that. In fact, I hear people, I know I was conned. That's what happened to me. I was conned. But since working with narcissistic abuse victims, a lot of us say we were conned, even when there wasn't literally a setup. In my situation, it was a setup, but even when there isn't necessarily like a conscious setup, like, oh, I want this from this person, I still think at the end when we walk away, we're like, yeah, we were duped. The whole thing, that wasn't real. The whole thing's not real. Is that how it felt to you the times that you've been in a relationship like that?
I absolutely felt conned. Yeah, absolutely. Because the level of dishonesty and deception, word choices, action, it was so intentional. Sort of specifically with the guy that I was just talking about is how kind and generous and the things he would say that were so empathetic that in reality he really lacked empathy. That he was, I mean, how can you talk down on women's bodies in that kind of way, but still be kind to your romantic partner if she'd gotten pregnant or who knows? Like how is there such that dichotomy? But there's that dichotomy because you've created it. You know,
Yeah.
you're only this one self, yet you've just shielded it so well.
Yeah.
And
In fact, you said, I don't think I agree with this, but you said it feels intentional. I know it feels that way. I'm not for sure they always know they're doing that. I think the need for some people are so severe to be liked or chosen that they sort of morph themselves chameleon-like into another person. So I'm not for sure it's always super intentional, but I do think there's intentional pieces to it. You can't tell a lie and not be intentional about the fact that you're being deceptive. Or in your case, that situation of your example of he had criticalness about you probably too. Why would he wouldn't? If he's
right.
way about everybody else, he's going to be that way about the people in his life. But he withheld it. He didn't say it to you because he knew it would push you away. So yeah, I definitely see that there's intentional pieces to it. Some is cold blooded, I think, but sometimes I don't think it's always is cold blooded. Sometimes I think it's super needy or super selfish. Yeah.
Mhm.
What do you think?
I don't know. I definitely I do agree that sometimes it can be unintentional, but for example, when I would start to pull away and the mask would come back on, that to me just felt so intentional. It's like you've already revealed yourself. And you know that if I am retreating or withdrawing, that if you put this mask on, that I'm going to second guess, come back, think that old personality is back, etc. That felt super intentional. And again, like being conned. But I once that was shattered for me, I just was out. I mean, I had just started taking care and leaving emotionally. And part of that is because I'd already done the hard work of leaving my first marriage that my bar of sticking with it. And he had so many qualities that I didn't want in a partner anyway. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was there, even him at his best was still not what I would have wanted in a long-term partner. But he worked at the time. Like
Yeah.
it was a good temporary escape, which
Yeah.
was messy and awful. Um, but I was so very aware of that, the con that you mentioned and how deceptive and it just was gross.
Yeah, in fact, there's 3 stages to a narcissistic abusive relationship. Just like there's 3 stages to the abuse cycle, this is not really it is kind of a cycle, but it is and isn't. And that is love bombing or breadcrumbing, and later on, and they kinda use that word. And then there's the devaluing and then the discarding. And discarding, in your case, you discarded him, but it can be either or. It kind of varies who does the discarding. But yeah, yeah, it is amazing that mask flip, I'll tell you, you may see, like, little hints of it, like, slight, like, leakage, but there is most often a moment when there it is, there's the real person. It's just for me, it was like cold water. I was just dumped with cold water. It was powerful. And it was a slight thing. What he did was we were first night of our honeymoon, we were walking back. I was so excited because it was supposedly our honeymoon, thinking we're gonna have a romantic time together because we got into the hotel, we traveled internationally, we just had a really nice dinner. And he said to me, I expect you probably are not interested in a musical, going out to see a musical right now. And I said, no. And I kind of hinted maybe we had something better in mind to do. And then he dropped me off and he said, "So I'll be back in a couple hours." And then I sat there and thought, and I confronted him about something earlier that day, and I thought to myself, "Yep, this was a lesson that he just gave me about don't ever confront him. Yep, this is what I get." I was stunned, stunned, came out of nowhere. And on your honeymoon,
Right.
yeah, yeah, it was cold, cold, and it did feel very calculating. So I think you and I are in agreement. Abuse isn't is a big topic. It happens in lots of different forms. It can probably be pretty. I mean, all the way from neglect to in torture. But narcissistic abuse is something that's inside of it, and it's unique in the sense that it's different. And the big piece of it is the deception. And we're also in agreement that not just narcissists do it. So if you and I were to give it a different name, what name would you give it? Do you have an idea?
That's a good question.
Because here's what Sandra Brown refers to it. She calls it pathological love relationships, but it can happen in families and between
Right.
coworkers and neighbors. And so to me, that's way too narrow, but I don't really
Mhm.
have a better. It's also referred to as relational harm. But again, that to me is not very specific.
Mhm. And I honestly think the impact of it is a little different than normal abuse. So, I mean, any abuse any abuse victim might think, "Oh, I'm to blame for this happening." They might think that, "Oh, I shouldn't have said XYZ, etc." But I feel like it's so much more intense in a narcissistic abuse relationship because there's also the consequence of you don't have the romantic partner that you would have wanted or that you did have. So it feels so much more intense. Um,
Yeah, in fact, I just read that one of the pieces that's unique to this type of abuse is grief for the lost person who never existed. And that happens mid section of the relationship when you start to realize, wow, who I thought I met doesn't exist. And then you start to miss who you. And for me, it felt like, because I even remember having this aha, like I had just gone through losing my first husband to death. And it hit me. I thought, I'm grieving. I'm grieving this person I thought I had met. I thought they existed, and no, they really didn't. But for me, the closest thing I could liken it to was that person died, although they never really were there. But it felt like I lost that person, Yeah, you're right. There's this huge piece, and we don't talk about that, Tara. Nobody talks about the grief work involved in recovering from abuse from this.
Mm, I agree. I don't know. I don't know. What would you think you would call it?
I don't have a word, so maybe we can ask. Does anyone else have anyone listening have an idea of what a better word? Because I don't know what to call it either. I guess that's, and I know that the clinicians as a whole, what I'm hearing out there when I get training and I read the research is they don't like the term narcissistic abuse. They wish it was called something else, but I don't have a better label for it either. I mean, emotional abuse again is too broad. It's more than
Mhm.
psychological abuse. I mean, I think we're stuck with the label because I can't think of a better one either.
Yeah, I want to say like something like psychopathic abuse, but then you get into like serial killers. Like that's not quite, but it kind of feels like a serial killer of the soul. I don't know.
They do, they break your spirit. They do. They really are good at that. Yeah. Yeah, whenever I get a troll on all of this, I just like, "Oh, good grief." I wanna roll my eyes and like, Do you come up with a better solution?" But I do know there's a lot of misinformation about what narcissistic abuse is, lots of it, and I think it's important that we define it and that we know what it is so that we can recognize what we're really talking about. Because sometimes, let's be really honest, on Instagram or TikTok or other social media platforms, they're really defining abuse. They're talking about psychological or emotional abuse. They're not talking about narcissistic abuse. I do think that we're applying it haphazardly everywhere to everything. But narcissistic abuse is real, and it's for me, when I stumbled across exactly what it is, it explained everything for me. It was like the perfect fit, and it it was so powerful because now I knew that there were others who'd gone through it, that this wasn't unique, that I wasn't extra dumb for missing it. I mean, it unlocked me in so many different ways. It was so healing for me. So I'm glad we have a label. I just wish it was if I don't know. Maybe it's good.
Yeah,
Good enough.
yeah. I personally, I'm not sure I would have used it to define my own experiences before because these people were not these people that I dated and were married to were never clinically diagnosed with narcissism, and such a small population is. So I think it's very helpful to recognize that it's not just people who are clinically diagnosed full blown narcissists. It can be more than that.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, this is really interesting. So next week we're going to get into talking about when we leave a relationship with an abuser and they promise that they're different and they come back and they seem different and we hope to have some kind of relationship. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? So let's talk about that next time. So Darvo, real quick, is a form of gaslighting attack where a person actually attacks you for bringing the issue up. They make you the offender for having a conflict with them. So it's a real flip of the script on you. And it's really hard because we get into a position of often over explaining or defending ourselves. So the best thing to do when you hit this is to use JADE. And the acronym stands for don't justify, don't argue, don't defend, and don't explain. What I found that I do typically that really helps me is that I just revisit the initial topic that I brought up and ask for a conclusion. And if they don't give me one, then I let it go and I walk away.
I love that tip, Carrie. So if you decide to try this tip at home, just let us know in the comments or on our social media profiles.
What did you think of this episode? And did you try the self help tip? We would love to hear how it went. Drop us a comment or send us an email. And are you following us on social media? We'd love to connect with you there. And we'll see you back here next Monday.